is your golf game these days, and what does it mean for the nation's health care? Two questions lawmakers may want to start asking themselves at this very moment after President Trump teed off for a round of golf with former presidential rival and Republican Senator Rand Paul. The two talked health care, apparently, and Senator Paul struck an optimistic tone afterward. Listen.
We had a great day with the president today. We did talk about some health care reform. I think the sides are getting closer
together, and I remain very optimistic that we will get Obamacare repeal. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Senator. With me now, Alex Burns is back with me. Amy Kremer is joining me, co-chair of Women Vote Trump. Margaret Hoover is here, CNN political commentator, of course, worked in the George W. Bush White House. Basil Smykla is here as well, executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. Margaret, what do you think of this golf course, I can't say it, you know where I'm going, golf course
diplomacy?
Thank you
golf
so
course
much.
diplomacy?
What do you think of it?
It's going to take more than a lot of golf to get this health care done, but it is a good start. They should have done it before the whole thing crashed and burned.
He did a lot of meetings.
He did a lot of meetings, but I think, first of all, look, I think what this does say is healthcare is not dead. I mean, the president said he wanted to move on, but this healthcare and the people that he's negotiating with, Rand Paul, Mulvaney, the budget director who was there too, they are movement conservatives who are ideological and deeply wedded to reforming healthcare for really principled reasons that they truly believe in. So it's not going to be that easy for Donald Trump or the Republican Party just to move on.
Well, and I want to ask you, Amy, if you agree. I mean, the president, he seemed to tweet a little bit of kumbaya after all of this as well. I mean, his tweet, his tweet says, anybody who thinks that repeal and replace of Obamacare is dead does not know the love and strength in the Republican Party. After that effort failed, we all laughed just a little bit about the love of the Republican Party, but how real do you think this renewed effort is?
Well, Kate, I mean, I think it is real, but the problem is Paul Ryan. It's not the president. Paul Ryan did not get a consensus in the caucus. He did exactly what the Democrats did when they crafted Obamacare, and it was crafted behind closed doors. They couldn't bring any amendments or anything to it. And so I would like to see Paul Ryan meeting with the House Freedom Caucus and with Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and other conservatives, because the issues that are important, I got to disagree with Kate on something, or with Margaret, I'm sorry, that these are not issues that it's only Republicans care strongly about. This bill that they brought forward did not lower premiums, did not lower deductibles, did not lower the price of prescription drug coverage. It did not allow insurance across state lines, the purchase of insurance across state lines. Those are not ideology, that's not an ideology thing. Those are very real issues that affect normal people, everyday people, and that's what people care about. Why Republicans didn't do that is beyond me. They really squandered an opportunity here.
Go ahead.
Let me just push back on that. Look, first of all, I don't belittle this by saying it's ideologically motivated. Like, I actually believe what the right and the conservative movement wants to do, that they want to create a more market-based healthcare environment, that they want to make it more competitive, that they want to lower premiums. I'm on board with all that. I have to push back, though, against this idea that Paul Ryan wasn't meeting with the Freedom Caucus or the conservatives. He is a movement conservative. He gave everything to them, and they just could not say yes. So what this is the president starting to engage in the debate. And by the way, the president is the one who didn't get down and dirty the details, doesn't know the policies, can't get in the weeds, and he's the one who's going to have to get up to speed in order to put real pressure on the Freedom Caucus.
But this also comes, and Basil, jump in on this.
He didn't have moderates. He didn't have moderates on board. It wasn't
and he
just
kept
the
looking
Freedom
He gave too much to the Freedom Caucus.
I mean, the more you're going to meet with Freedom Caucus and the more concessions you give to them, the more you're going to lose moderates. It's either, the way it kind of has worked is you choose one path, and that path didn't work for him. Basil, the president has also said in the aftermath of the failed effort that he was open to working with Democrats on this. I mean, when you have this tweet, when you have him golfing with Rand Paul, do you think that the effort to work with Democrats ended before it began?
Absolutely. He's gone, golfing 14 times in the last 10 weeks. So, but none of them will be able to do that. I'm not counting, but they haven't been with Democrats. So I'm not hopeful that the president will be working with Democrats. And the truth of the matter is Democrats should stay firm on this. The repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act is not something that Americans, and I agree that there may be some changes that can be made, but right now it doesn't look like the Republicans have had any real strategy to actually get meaningful changes put in place. And to be honest, I don't even know if Rand Paul is the person that you want actually marshaling this in the Senate. I don't know if he's the right one that's going to move the rest of the the Senate Republicans or any influence on in the other chamber to actually get meaningful
stoking
changes.
the fire with the Freedom Caucus, though.
Yeah,
he
he
was
was,
one who was
but-
sort of putting gasoline
Let's
on the
stoke
fire.
the
But I
fire.
don't think
What we've
he's
seen since the collapse of the American Health Care Act is that the strategic and substantive gap between the factions of the Republican Party has actually gotten wider. That I've spoken to a number of not moderate Republicans, but more sort of traditional conservatives. Folks like Adam Kinzinger in Illinois, John Faso in New York, who their takeaway from that debacle is that they need to not do comprehensive top to bottom in one shot through reconciliation healthcare overhaul. They need to do smaller, more bite-sized and bipartisan initiatives. And that is not what Rand Paul is proposing.
Right, but I'll tell you, and maybe this shows how everyone's in a different place. I talked to some Freedom Caucus people. They've said, "Oh, we're closer than ever. We're 2 steps away from getting a deal done," which is exactly completely antithetical to what you're saying and where things stand. Let's move on. I'm going to shift the conversation, just as the president seems to be wanting to shift the conversation. Where does the president want to shift the conversation? Look no further than his Twitter feed right now, and it seems that he wants to shift the conversation back to Russia and the investigation into Russia. Don't die. The tweets today, I don't know if we have them, we can put them up. I mean, there's at least 4 of them that I haven't looked in the last couple minutes, but many of them talking about the Russia investigation, talking about how the Russia story is a hoax, but also pointing to the most recent one saying, complimenting Fox News to having multiple sources saying that this was electronic surveillance of Trump and people close to Trump. This is unprecedented. He tags the FBI, Alex, to inform them of the sources coming from Fox News. Why does the president, in your view, when he has, we talked about it at the top of the hour, huge week, foreign policy, huge week, Neil Gorsuch, why is the president today wanting to shift the conversation back to Russia?
I don't know that there's any strategy behind it. I think what we've seen over and over with Donald Trump, going back to the very beginning of the campaign, is whenever he's attacked on something, whenever he feels vulnerable on something, his only real response strategy is to escalate, right? So he's not going to let this one go, even though any conventional political calculus, and I've spoken to a whole number of Republicans about how they would handle this if they were in the Trump White House, any conventional calculus would have the president and his advisors say, look, we're going to let Congress do its job, we're going to let the FBI do its job, we're going to get back to doing the people's business. There's just this need that the president seems to have to litigate this and fight this, even if it's not really politically advantageous to him.
Amy, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's kind of the same thing that we saw during the election cycle, and everybody said, it wouldn't work. Donald Trump is true to himself, and he goes out there and he takes it and he lets people know what he's thinking and what's going on. And he's tired of being crucified about.
As a supporter of Donald Trump, do you think that's helpful for him, different from being a candidate? Do you think that's helpful for him as president?
I don't know. I mean, it depends on the issue. It could go either way. But I think on the Russia issue, he is tired of being crucified about this. And on last week, when this unmasking story came out, nobody covered it. Fox News was the only one that even talked about it. No one else even mentioned it. And I think it's very important that the American people should know that. It goes back to his claim about the wiretapping and the surveillance. He was actually, they did have surveillance on him. And one of the high-level administration officials released did the unmasking. And so why isn't anybody talking about that?
High-level administration officials unmasking. There is a lot that is not known. The House committee and the Senate committee are still looking into this. And when you ask any of the statements that you just made, you ask the folks that are in charge of investigating this, they say they are nowhere close to reaching any of the conclusions on that right now. That's why I wonder, on a big week like this, when we have been talking about the Supreme Court and his big meetings, why does he himself want to return to a focus on Russia when it doesn't look good for his administration at this moment?
I think he wants to set the record straight, Kate.
It's just not true that the media has not covered the allegations going from different
I was just going to let that one go. Guys, great to see you. Amy, it's great to see you as always. Thank you very, very much.
Good to see you.